Hey, welcome back. Sorry for the delay in getting started again. Um, we're going to do a little more practice with balls today. Uh, this is a ball that has the form shadow cut out and cast shadow is present. And what I want you to understand is that if you know one, you can figure out the other. So you're just going to draw along with me right now. You can do 3 or 4 of these drawings on one piece of paper. That would be fine. Just photograph the entire sheet. We'll do 4 altogether. So you can divide your sheet up into quarters if you want. You can use the front and the back. I don't really care. So start again by making a circle. And remember the idea of just gradually darkening it until it doesn't have any bad dents and no bad bulges. And now we're going to try to figure out the direction the light is coming from. And we do that by looking at the cast shadow. So grab my line tool here and see we're going to extend from the margin of the cast shadow like that and like that. So we know that the form shadow has to start here and end here. It could even be this exact diameter, but it probably isn't. So let's draw these light lines. Estimate the angle as well as you can. Draw your diameter very lightly, perpendicular to it. And now we're going to ask ourselves, does the light seem to be in front of the ball, like on our side of the ball, or does it seem to be on the other side of the ball? In other words, a backlit situation. So it could even be in the same plane as the ball. This is a little sphere that I created for these lessons. And so if the light was in the same plane as the ball, it would look like this. If the light was in front of the ball, it would look sort of like this. And if the light is behind the ball is backlit, it would look something like this. And that's easy to remember because if you're on the side of the ball where the light is, the ball is obviously going to be mostly in light. And if you're on the side of the ball opposite the light, then it's going to be mostly in shadow. Notice that these are all possible with this direction of light, right? What's not possible is twisting this way or this way, right? That means the light angle of light is changing. This is one angle of light, but it's coming from behind or from in front. So the way we think about answering that question is we look at the direction of this ellipse. And notice how this ellipse is going up slightly away from us. And that means that the light should be slightly in front of the ball. It's on our side of the ball. So we're going to try just making a slight curve down like that. If the shadow is going up higher, it could be a bigger curve, but I don't think it is. Now I'm going to go ahead and sketch this line. And the big idea here is that this cast shadow has to stay between these two lines. I'm going to check my work by doing that other trick that we learned recently of the clock. I would say this is just a little past 3 o'clock. That looks about right, and this looks like about 7:30. That looks about right. So this, remember, is called a shadow map. It's the first step in shading. And the next step is going to be what we call the first shading. We're going to erase the construction lines. I want you to erase yours too. And let's go ahead and clean this up. And what I want to do is look at the reference photo to see how close we were. So you would think I'd be a little better at this by now, but notice that the light is actually more in front of the ball than I guessed. Can you see that? So to fix my shadow map, all I have to do is make this curve down more. Okay, so first shading, you're right-handed, I'm going to assume, so you're going to shade this way and shade over the entire region of cast and form shadow. Like that. At this point, we don't need the shadow map anymore because we know where our shadows are. And these lines are probably going to get in the way, so we erase them. And then to finish the drawing, we're going to do some sharpening strokes along here and darkening. Remember, there's no reflected light up here because the light is not hitting this area from the tabletop. And then we're going to curve in towards the light like that to create this transition from the shadow into the halftones. Notice that with every stroke, I'm putting my pencil down in the darkest part of the shadow, and I am releasing my pencil as it moves towards the light. Okay, what I am not doing is this, and please don't draw this. Okay, we could be doing like you could shade like this, back and forth. You see how different that looks? That would be a quicker way to do it, and probably would feel natural to those of you who were raised on coloring in the placemats at Chuck E. Cheese, but that's not how we shade, okay? Because you can't, if you're shading back and forth like this, see what's happening with every stroke? It's sort of like doing a U-turn at the end of the stroke and creating a little bit of darkness. We don't want that. What we want is these beautiful, soft transitions. And the only way we can get that is by shading one direction only, always from the dark towards the light. And frankly, a lot of you are not going to be comfortable lifting up your pencil every time. It's going to feel weird, but it's still what you need to learn to do if you want to gain any control over your edges. Now this is more sharpening strokes, but notice there is some lightening for reflected light as we get down here, so I'm going to touch that much less. And now the shadow on the ground, remember our second shading direction is going to go straight across like that. And I'm going to sharpen this edge, because remember, anytime you can see an edge, it means you're seeing two different values. So we can see this edge, we can say, okay, which side of the edge is darker and which side is lighter. If I zoom in, it becomes very clear. This is a little lighter, this is a little darker. So we're going to darken on this side of the edge. We come up and around, and the edges are exactly the same again. See right here. And then I'm going to transition to more horizontal shading like that. Now when your brain sees a sharp edge, you're going to be assuming that there's a very large difference between the two values. And when your brain sees a soft edge, you're going to assume that you're not seeing very much difference between your values. And that information can be wrong. For example, this is a big jump between values, and so your brain is going to assume that this edge here is pretty sharp. But notice it's a little softer than this edge here. This edge here is sharper than this one, but this has a much smaller value jump. So what we want to do is create the definition here by the sharpness and create the definition here by the value jump. At school we like to do these studies on gray paper because that saves us a lot of time. We can just put our highlights in with white. But working from home, we're going to just stick with the white paper. So we're going to be darkening a little more in the core shadow here. Even the coarse shadow, see, gets lighter at the bottom because that reflected light is filling in. And then to get that sense of a highlight, we're going to have to, let's just save ourselves some trouble and just do a very light shading over the whole thing, very faintly, and then we can just erase the highlight. You may also be noticing that the shadow on the ground, the cast shadow, gets a little fuzzier as it moves away from the object. That's normal. And it gets darker right under the object. That's also what we expect. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So this is another white ball with the form shadow edited out. So we start with our circle again. And let's take a look at our light lines. Whoops, let me start down here. There's one. There's the other. And so our diameter is about like this. And this time, let's, I feel more confident that the light is just a little bit in front of the ball. Well, let's start with this. Here we go. Light, light, diameter. This axis through the cast shadow is just tilted a little. There's the ellipse. It's intersecting at about 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock here. I mean, yeah, that's 8, and this is about 5. Looks okay. And yeah, I'm gonna say just a slight curve down this time. So here's the angle of the light. The light's a little in front of the ball, so we should be seeing something like this. So let me leave that there. And that's the actual sphere that we're looking at. So pretty close. Again, curves down a little more than I thought. Maybe like that. Okay, so slight adjustment. And erase some of these construction lines. Don't need those anymore. And for those of you who might be left-handed, I'm going to do this shading, first shading the way I naturally do it, which is sloping this way. If you're drawing anything really hard, like a face or a figure or something, this is a good chance to check your work, because once you've established your main shadow shapes, if you made any mistakes in your outlines, you can see them now so much more easily than you would have been able to see them before. For example, I would say this cast shadow is coming out a little too far. It's just a lot easier to see the difference between this dark shape and that dark shape over there than it is to see the difference between the dark shape over here and the lines on this side. Okay, so now I'm going to do second shading. Well, erase some of that shadow map. As I've said before, if you are doing your shadow mapping lightly enough, you don't need to erase it. I just have to do mine a little darker because you need to be able to see what I'm doing. And then we're going to start up here again, curving this way. Curving with the edge to sharpen it, and trailing out over the edge to soften it. If you think of this as the North Pole and the South Pole, and you think of these as sort of latitude lines, it might be helpful. See how they go like straight across here, and then when they get down here they start to curve this way, and then when they get up here they're curving the other way. Just a little. But that curve gives you a really strong sense of the roundness of the form. It's really important to learn how to do that. So as I move this way, I'm not worried about reflected light because I'm up here where there really isn't any. And I'm going to start curving around like this to sharpen this edge. Notice this area is flooded with reflected light, so I barely need to touch that anymore. What I need to worry about now is cast shadow on the ground, horizontal strokes, like that, and then horizontal right up under the ball. And then some sharpening strokes right through here. Notice too that this edge of the cast shadow where I'm going horizontally, this edge is a little sharper in the photograph than this edge out here, and that my horizontal shading direction is perfect for capturing that difference. Because as I come around the corner here, I'm shading with the direction of the edge more. I still am trying not to make it really sharp, but I'm still shading with the direction of the edge. And up here, I'm shading into that edge, so it's naturally going to be a little less sharp. And then over here, it gets a little bit sharper again. And the reason for that is not just because out here I'm further from the ball and here I'm closer to the ball. There's another reason, which is that along this edge and this edge, the fuzzy zone of the shadow is foreshortened. Like the whole shadow is foreshortened, so is that fuzzy area of the shadow. And out here, it's not foreshortened. And what that means is if you picture the cast shadow on the ground, and you picture this zone outside the cast shadow where it's fuzzy, this zone is a relatively consistent width. But as soon as you tilt the shadow the way we see it, hang on, I'm going to have to raise the camera. See, when you tilt it like this, see what happens? These areas get foreshortened. They get compressed, and this area doesn't. So this area ends up looking much fuzzier than both of these. So all that's left for this drawing is a little more darkening through here, because the ball right here is darker than the shadow behind it. Until it isn't anymore, which is here. This is another one of those examples where the ball is visible dark against light for a while, and then it gets down here and it's light, it gets dark. And then my reflected light is looking just way too bright right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my first shading direction and just sort of flatten that all out and even it out. And finally, I'm going to do very light first shading through the halftones and erase that highlight again. And that's going to be it for that one. Just fix the exposure here. That looks way too bright. Okay. So now we're going to do our first floating ball. And that means it's going to try this light. We're going to see the form shadow here, and we're going to draw the cast shadow. So that's better. Start with the circle. Again, if you need to take a new piece of paper, that's fine. And we're going to do the light lines over here. It looks like it's going to go off the page, isn't it? So the shadow starts here. It goes almost straight across to here. And So the light is going this direction. So try to match this angle. And do perpendicular to it like this. And we're just going to leave this line straight for now. And we're going to predict that the cash out is going to be going pretty much straight across, because this isn't really curving too much one way or the other. So that means we've got to do this ellipse, keeping it underneath the bottom point where the ball touches the ground, and sort of stretching straight across, like that. That's a very long shadow. So let's take a look at the reference photo and see how right here. And that's looking pretty good. So we're gonna erase these. Whoops, erased the wrong line there. And first shading, I'm going to do lefty again. You do righty if you're right-handed. And we assess the work. We say, okay, this shadow could maybe be a little wider right here. But maybe this dark comes up a little above the middle right here. But overall, pretty good. Maybe the shadow comes down a little more right here. Always just get in the habit of, after you do first shading, that's the time to sort of push and pull your shadow shapes, because you haven't made any dark lines on your paper yet. And so anything you need to change can be very easily erased. So I'm going to mark my horizon on this drawing. And now do my second shading. Sharpening this way. Remember, sharpening the edge by going along the edge. This is not something you have to think about for the rest of your life, just long enough to get the hang of it. It's just like playing guitar, you've got to think hard about all your hand positions and your fingering, all that stuff, and nobody likes that because it's not natural to hold a note on a fretboard. But people do it because they know that they won't have to do it forever. After a while, the lines, whether they're music or drawing, will just come right out of you the right way. Sadly, though, when I was a kid, I didn't understand any of this. And I thought doing realistic artwork must just be very boring because I figured it's the kind of thing you obviously would have to just strain to do your whole life. When obviously it's like an instrument. You only strain for a little while. Okay, that's enough of the form shadow. Now horizontal again. And this is kind of a good technique to know. I'm not sharpening this edge yet, but I'm putting my pencil down right on the line. And that way I get a very controlled edge. Not a totally sharp edge, but I get a fair amount of control in there. If you want to draw soft and atmospheric, you can do a lot with a pencil that's not too sharp, but when it comes time to sharpen your edges, and most artists have at least a few edges that they're going to want to sharpen over the course of a drawing, it's really good to have a sharp point on your pencil. So that's the second shading. Now I'm going to look for where it gets the darkest. Of course, that's right in here, and this is where I'm going to be sharpening. So this is really dark right under the ball here. And notice I'm only using one pencil for these drawings because that's all you have, but I can get a really good dynamic range out of this pencil because I'm controlling my pressure. Like right here, this is the first time in this drawing that I've pressed hard. And notice that it really stands out. If you're pressing hard like this right from the start, you're shooting yourself in the foot because now when you need to really emphasize something, there's nowhere for you to go. So don't do that. And then it switches right about here to where this edge is darker. See that? So that's pretty tricky, but I'm going to try to do a little sharpening and darkening right through here and pull it down almost to that accent. And if this is dark here, then I've obviously got to darken pulling around the other way. This is really, on this sphere, this area up here is really just about as dark as the accent on the ground. And you'll notice that what's happened is, having darkened these areas, I now have a reflected light that's way too bright. And so I have a choice. I can either do some contour shading or repeat my first shading direction. So here's what contour shading looks like, where I try to curve with the form. And since it's still a little too light, I can go back with my first shading direction and just sort of unify everything in here. Just going a little harder. And the last thing I want to tell you about this particular sphere, or this photograph, is you'll notice there's sort of two areas of darkness out here. There's one zone that gets really pretty dark, and another zone that is somewhat lighter out here. You see that? And that's often caused by a lamp that is in a reflector. You don't see this from like a little LED spotlight or something. You see it when you've got like a big metal reflector with a light bulb in it, and the inside shadow is the shadow that's thrown by just the light bulb, and then the outside shadow, which is a little bigger, is thrown by that larger light source of the reflector. Look how much contrast there is from here to over there. Pretty extreme. And also notice that I didn't do my highlight yet, so I just keep pushing these darks, and now I'm gonna do the highlight. This time I'm gonna do it a little more the right way, which is to just sort of map where the highlight goes, and then just do first shading around it. But I'm going to curve my first shading a little bit just to make it look more natural in this ball. And that's it for that one. We only have one more to go, so in one moment. So this one's obviously a little different. Let's check out what the light is doing here. I would say the shadow starts about here and ends about here. So here's our diameter. Maybe a little lower on this side. That means the direction of our light is about like this. But there's something different going on here, which is that the light, as we can see from our model, so there's the direction of the light. But with this shadow edge way down here, means that the light is coming from the front of the ball. The light's coming from very near where we are right now. And that means that the cast shadow is going to be going back in that direction. So we draw the circle again. See if you're getting better at that. The angle of the light. Like that. And now we imagine the shadows touching the ball right about here. It's about where it's sitting on the ground. And our shadow is going to be angling back sharply. So our ellipse might look something like that. You see the angle of the ellipse. It's very steep. But it still has to stay within these two lines. And then the form shadow, of course, as we noted, curves down a lot like that. And actually, if the shadow is that much behind the ball, I don't think we're going to see so much down here. I'm going to take something away from that. And let's go ahead and do a first shading. And now let's see how close we are. And not too bad. Somehow, this comes up a little higher here. It's like the shadow's even steeper coming around. But remember, this is our opportunity to make these corrections. So, this is not what I would call beautiful form lighting. This lighting's a little awkward. Almost like flash lighting, if you remember from the last lesson. So, I'm going to erase this shadow mapping, which got really dark because of all the corrections. And this one. And core shadow, really dark and sharp up here as usual. And the cast shadow, very dark and sharp under here, as we've also been seeing. Kind of like this. And not much more to shade here because there's not much shadow here. It's almost all in light. There's our highlight, and we can do just a very little bit of shading around the highlight to bring it out. Horizon line. And one step darker over here. So the reflected light's a little smaller on this side. I never really tidied up my original circle on this drawing. The key here is just these outlines where light meets light really have to stay faint. So if you make them too dark, you can even go back over them with the eraser. And I see like a little bulge right here, so look how easy that is to, as long as you're making the ball smaller in the shadow area, it's really easy to just sort of tighten that up a little. A little harder to make it bigger. So in the same way that if you can draw a box, you can draw almost anything in perspective. If you can properly shade a sphere, you can shade almost anything. And what I like to do at the end of these lessons is just show you how versatile some of these techniques are. So bear with me, but I'm just going to do a quick drawing of a face to show you how this would work on something that's a little more fun to draw. You don't have to draw this. So I could think of the overall head as an egg shape, and I could imagine the shadow edge if it was just an egg, and the cast shadow on the neck, something like that. And I could do a little first shading even. And you see how different it is to conceptualize a form like this in 3 dimensions versus 2. And that's what you can do if you learn how to do this shadow mapping. And now I'm going to try to bring out some of the smaller forms. So looking at the cast shadow, form shadow under the nose, you might see something like this. And there might be a little bit of a cast shadow underneath the brow on the other side. Form shadow of the upper lip. Shadow shape of the chin. And what's happening is that really general contour of the shadow shape we'd get on an egg is getting more specific as it starts to conform to these features. I forgot the form shadow on the bottom lip and the cast shadow underneath the upper lip. Like that. Believe it or not, the eyelid casts a shadow onto the eye. And then the eye socket usually has a little bit of a form shadow or a halftone. And then things get really interesting when we look at things like the tip of the nose, which is basically a sphere. And that's what we've just been learning to draw. So here is the form shadow, the core of the form shadow going through there. cast shadow accent, nostrils, more cast shadow under the nose, gets really dark under here. Shadow accent where the lips meet. Cast shadow under the bottom lip. Core shadow through the form shadow on the bottom lip. Darken this cast shadow a little bit. And here's another spherical form. See the chin? Core shadow and reflected light and cast shadow. So we're going to learn shortly how to block these features out and how to place them correctly, but I'm really doing this little demonstration just to show you how we really need to be able to draw believable spheres before we can move into that other stuff, because the sphere is sort of the fundamental form in shading. And I'm not going to take this any further, but hopefully you can start to recognize some of the things that we've been learning, and also the value of being able to predict, say, where the light's coming from, which is obviously like here, and be able to predict how it's going to influence these forms, which is also really important. Because if you're drawing something and you can predict what you're about to see, then every time you lift up your eyes to look, you're just sort of checking to see if you were right. If you're drawing something you have no idea what you're looking for, if you can't predict how things would look, then every time you look up, you're sort of starting from a point of no information, no knowledge, and it's going to be much, much harder to draw. So thanks as always for your attention. Good luck, and I will see you soon.